Okay, we are live. It is
Hello and welcome.
exactly Tuesday evening, just gone 8 o'clock. We are here for episode 6. If you were doing 6, how would you do it?
I wouldn't do it like that.
You wouldn't.
I'd probably do that.
That, yeah.
I don't think I'd do. Maybe it's possible. I think I'd probably do my index finger.
I just think of that scene in Inglorious Bastards, which you didn't like. Dry glazer.
I don't even remember it. But
You didn't like it, did you?
Well, I didn't. Not that scene particularly. I didn't like that movie particularly.
That's what I mean.
But I also don't really like Quentin Tarantino movies generally.
Oh.
Since Pulp Fiction, Reservoir Dogs amazing, Pulp Fiction amazing.
Yep.
Jackie Brown okay, and then
Jackie Brown was great.
Yeah, well, it's decent. No,
It's not Pulp Fiction or Reservoir Dogs.
Yeah, just like everything else it's just a bit. I don't know. It's all a bit OTT and a bit like he's a bit up himself. The fifth Quentin Tarantino movie. I'm like, oh Jesus, just release your movie. Say directed by Quentin Tarantino.
Yeah, he is. He is. But today's theme
is
emotion. He's a terrible actor, yeah. Coming back to today's theme is emotion.
Oh, well, I'm angry at Quentin Tarantino.
Are you?
No, not really.
But
his movies definitely evoke a certain emotion in me, that's for sure. Disdain, maybe.
Oh, wow, it cut out. I missed what you said. His movies definitely evoke a
certain emotion in me, which is maybe disdain. I've just realised that my door is open and the TV is on, so I'm just going to close the door.
Okay. And there's some lens flare from a picture of circus or something.
Yeah. Which disappears when I sit in front of it.
That's very good. Yeah, he's kind of not a great actor. I do think of From Dusk Till Dawn.
Not a great actor. I mean, ironically, Dusk Till Dawn is probably his best performance.
I did love that. I do love that film.
That's a great film.
Very good. But that's because, isn't it Robert Rodriguez who directed that? That's probably why. And I thought Machete was amazing. Don't know if you've seen Machete.
I have.
And Machete Kills was pretty good too, second one. But
haven't seen Machete Kills.
Yeah, it's very silly. But his films do evoke a certain emotional response, Quentin Tarantino. And yeah. I think he has gone into slightly pretentious territory.
Yeah.
But the emotional response to films is really interesting for me because I was asked by one of my classes before half term, like when we hadn't been back very long. When was the last time I cried? And I think I said, "What do you mean by cry?" And the student said, "Full on crying, like snot on the face, crying type thing." And the last time I cried like that was it wasn't so much of an argument as a kind of deep discussion with my wife, Davina, over the summer. But what I remembered, that I also told the class, was that when I watched Coco, the film Coco, and what actually happened was I came home, my wife was watching it, and I watched like the last 20 minutes of it. I hadn't even seen the whole thing. I was so overcome with emotion. I was crying properly at that film. And then we rewatched it again. I had the same response. It was, I don't know, I think it was a very evocative, family-oriented film. It just reminded me of like my family. The gran in the film reminded me of my gran. The little kid little brown kid wandering around playing guitar reminded me of me. And the way everybody was like praying, all the Catholic imagery in it reminded me of my family as well. But both of us, my wife and I, were like crying. We just found it incredibly.
Is that unusual for you to cry at a movie? And was it because of the like connection that you felt and all the different connections that you experienced in it, or is it like, for me, like I'll cry at pretty much any movie, and it's these days. That's only since I became a dad.
Ah,
Before that, I still cry at movies, but not with like such easy regularity of like yesterday, or no, maybe the day before.
Yeah,
we watched The Polar Express.
I haven't seen it. Know about it.
It's not very good. It's Robert Zemeckis, animated CGI with Tom Hanks playing almost every character.
Yeah.
It's it's an incredibly Christmas movie. Had Lauren realized that it was that Christmassy, we probably wouldn't have watched it.
Okay.
Mid-November. It was a little bit too early to start on the Christmas movies. Now Albie has wanted to watch it 3 days on the trot.
Okay.
Yeah, I cried at that.
I do cry at films, and it's kind of, it moves. Like, I watched Big Hero 6, and I was like, oh my God, I cried at that. And I cried at Wall-E.
Right.
And Forrest Gump and Up. And
Up's an easy one to cry at. I mean, Up, I watched that again recently. I've been introducing Albie to, the various Pixars, because they're movies that I can enjoy and he can enjoy. And, most kids' movies are not that way, where it's really a family movie. So doing the Pixar theme for a while now, slowly introducing him to them. But Up, like the opening of Up is, it kills you. It's, the whole life of the main character, whatever his name is, the old guy. Carl with his wife,
the whole baby thing.
Like meeting, getting older, baby thing, breaking into their savings and being destitute over and over and over. And then
even
dying, and it's right from the get-go, it's like, oh.
Yeah, and I suppose films are kind of like we both enjoy films, so there can be an easy, something I find. I really love films and what they evoke. I enjoy the emotional responses and riding it in a film, whatever it might be. Yeah. But I think, what do you think emotion? How do you define emotion?
Well, they're pretty difficult to define. Feelings, but then it's like, how do you define the feelings? And we all know them when we have them. As a generalization, and I know there are people who struggle with identifying emotions. One definition would be body sensations with a voiceover.
Well, body sensations with last week's theme, interpretation.
Yeah. Because the sensations of, for instance, fear and excitement are identical. Hands sweat, heart races, pupils narrow, maybe some trembling. Like, the physical attributes of fear and excitement are the same. They are the same. What's different about them is the interpretation. You tell yourself, I'm scared. You tell yourself, I'm excited. Now, there is another part to it that doesn't really get included in that. But again, it's just about the interpretation. It's like, do you see a dark figure coming towards you, as opposed to, I know I'm sitting on a roller coaster?
What's
Like,
the bit that gets forgotten? What do you mean?
how the world occurs around you, like the situation and the circumstance, and because it's not just it's all part of the voiceover, but the voiceover is not just necessarily the voiceover. It's it's a bit broader. It's how the whole world occurs. That's unknown and could, be a dog that's going to attack me or a man with a knife in the shadows. Like, it occurs a certain way, but you tell yourself, oh, therefore I'm scared. That's unknown.
Right, okay.
Therefore I'm scared. It's the brain's reaction, based on a survival instinct, fight or flight, as opposed to I'm sitting on a roller coaster and I know I'm scared, but whoa, I'm excited. Like,
Yeah. Or watching a horror film.
Or yeah. There's something a bit broader than just the voiceover and the internal dialogue.
The uncertainty and the unknown is like Stephen King says that one of the things that when he's writing, I remember reading an interview with him, he said it all starts with fear of the dark. All starts with that. And then he kind of goes from there.
Right. Now there are, God, I'm going to forget what this is. There are only two natural, inbuilt fears. Everything else is learned. And they are heights and
loud noises.
Right? That's right, isn't it? Heights and loud noises.
Or fear of falling, like that. The falling thing.
Yeah. Well, that's the heights.
Yeah.
And whether you're scared 3 inches off the ground or, like an 85-year-old might be scared walking because that is risky for them because they're at risk of falling. They want to be lower. They want to be sitting. They want to be more stable and more safe. A 3-year-old is less scared of walking and, being at that height, but the height itself doesn't matter. It's the fear of, the fall and what you perceive as being too high. And
you can train with that. But those are the only two things that we've...
Yeah, I mean, people jump out of airplanes. It's not about whether you're 6 inches off the ground or, 2,000 feet into the air or whatever height. Where do people jump from? Like 10,000 feet?
Oh, I don't know.
Something like that, right?
Yeah.
5,000, 10,000, something like that. I don't know. I had a friend who used to be a really avid jumper. She was like, when you start training, you have to do like a tandem jump with someone else. And then at some point you graduate to jumping on your own. And then at some point you graduate to like packing your own chute.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, like that's a big deal to learn how to pack your own chute, and an even bigger deal to like pack someone else's. So she was packing her own chute.
And then I suppose you graduate to Point Break.
Yeah, then you graduate to doing aerial acrobatics.
Yeah.
Which is not just falling, it's everything else that you do in the air and being in control of that, which actually isn't that difficult to initiate with that much wind resistance.
So do you know people who've done that?
It's much harder to generate a somersault from a run because you've got to generate the rotation yourself. From the moment of impact with your feet on the floor or the springboard or the trampette or whatever it is. You got to hit it with the right angle and the right response at the right moment with the right kind of body tension, and then you've got to shift your body shape into the air as you take off to generate a somersault. And it's tough. It's really tough.
Yeah.
And it's really tough to generate the rotation forwards. It's much easier to generate rotation backwards.
Oh, really?
With backwards you can start with an arm swing. So that
to get the
rotation immediately, and then tucking your knees and your hips up continues that rotation. To generate forwards, you don't have that same, arms this way pulls you down, doesn't take you up into a somersault. Much harder. When you're skydiving, you've got the wind resistance, and you can shift
lean forward a bit. Yeah.
Like a bird shifts their wings and it alters their, direction, you're doing the same thing. You're just shifting the wind resistance, and it alters your direction in the air. It's much easier to generate a somersault with wind resistance than through acrobatics, like through your body mechanics.
I didn't realize that, because training martial arts, we do a lot of falling, a lot of break falls, a lot of backwards break falls, and my instructor would pick me for demos, and I wouldn't always know what he was going to do. He would tell me, and occasionally he'd warn me. He'd say like, "Oh, backwards break fall," and I could do a takedown or whatever. But I remember I was sparring once, and this sneaky person I was sparring with we were doing sweep kicks. So I keep quite a light front foot, and I got used to him sweeping the front foot. I was kind of like ready for it. So after he like got me used to that, he came back and swept my back leg. So I swept my back leg. I just go splat, go right down, and I'm like, oh, okay, and I get up again. Now there was a bit of a pause in the class, like, whoa, are you okay? And my instructor, he comes over to me and he goes, you actually fell really well. And that kind of training, I didn't even think. There wasn't even time to experience any kind of emotional response. It was like, okay, I'm down, get up. It's really interesting to think about how I would have been if I hadn't trained, or if I hadn't been training for a long time.
So what was it about your fall that made it really good?
Well, I wasn't hurt.
Okay.
That's one thing. But he said, it sounds obvious, but like, yeah,
it's really funny. It reminds me of when I was training, right? And when I was learning to backflip, and I remember I was in a class with a guy called Errol, and our instructor was fabulous coach, and he actually ended up being a colleague and a boss of mine many years later. He was a very high level coach, a guy called Simon, and he was coaching us, and like Errol did a backflip, and he got really excited, and Simon just went, that was awful. And he went, yeah, but I survived. And Simon goes, survival is not a measure of success. And like that has stuck with me for 20 years. Survival is not a measure of success. It's like, that's the absolute bare minimum, right?
It is the bare minimum.
It's like,
it's bare minimum.
You can't get any lower than that.
It was so the speed with which I got up and was straight back into it was one of the things I think. But I didn't even think.
What was it? That was after the fall. What was it about the fall that was good?
I don't actually know.
I'll ask it another way. What constitutes a good fall? And you said you went splat like onto your face.
No, it was backwards, because I was standing up this way. Mm-hmm. He came and he swept the floor and took out my back leg. So from
behind, so your legs came up this way.
Yeah. So if we're facing each other this way,
yep,
it was like that. You imagine kicking with your right foot.
Yep. Sweeping round.
Sweep the leg.
Yep.
So instead of the front leg, my back leg. So I'd gone like that.
Right.
Onto my back.
Okay. So what constitutes a good fall so that you don't hurt yourself that way? Because that's not a fall that I have trained in doing. I imagine like not having your head crack, the back of your head crack the floor is part of it. Protect the brain. That's number one always. Yep.
So the way we've been taught to break fall is you start to learn to tuck your chin in, and then as you fall back, hit the floor. And the way I was also taught is, see how a baby falls down? Like they're walking along and they kind of land on their backside.
Yeah.
It's like kind of a roll back. Yep. So we do a lot of that rolling back, hitting the floor, roll, hit the floor, roll, hit the floor. Okay. So that, and tuck chin in.
And tuck your shirt in.
Yeah, I've been at school too long today. There's enough people not tucking their shirts in. It's ridiculous. Tuck your chin in.
Or I'm going to sweep your leg.
Oh man, but it was that.
Brilliant.
Yeah, tuck the chin, tuck the shirt, tuck the shirt, tuck the
Yep.
chin.
Yep.
And that's what, and we drill it loads of times, over and over again.
Mm.
And then, but that was a novel situation, and I was able to deal with it.
Yeah.
And I suppose it took all the emotion out of it, and it was like I'm in action. It was bringing it into action.
Yeah.
I suppose that's what training and habits do. Like the first time I taught a class, or the first time I played guitar or performed guitar, there's all the emotions that go through. There's a pupil at school, so he's become this really good guitarist, very expressive, soloing, like listening, understanding, working with like everybody. And like about 3 years ago, like when we performed, he was shaking. He would shake. He's like, and afterwards, he always go, "That was terrible." And to see how he's grown as a guitar player and an expressive guitar player is brilliant.
Mm.
And it does feel like the first time you try something, there's all sorts of emotions going on. And then learning to learning to appreciate that emotional response. Something expressive like playing guitar is about how you express the emotion on the guitar without, and performing is a whole other world as well. Playing guitar, I can sing and play guitar in front of like at school. I have a problem, friends colleagues, pupils, whatever. But friends and family, I find it a little bit harder, a little bit more like emotional, or being judged, or what they're going to think. Those kind of thoughts running through my head. What's it going to be like?
Yeah.
And I don't know. Does it go back to the fear, fight or flight response?
Yeah, I was going to say. Yeah, it does. I was about to say that like performing is something that I'm familiar with, right? Not guitar, not music, but as a performer, as an artist. So when you're performing as an actor, a dancer, a circus artist, a guitarist, whatever, and I think probably acting is an easier example. What you do is you train, you do your practice, your deliberate practice. You learn your chords and your riffs and your strokes. Strumming.
Yeah, I would say strum patterns. I don't think I would say strokes.
Strum patterns. Okay, whatever. You learn your technique. As an actor, you'll learn your script, or you'll create your show if it's a devised piece or whatever. And then you go from your training into rehearsal period, and then you'll rehearse, right? Rehearse, either as a solo artist or with your company or your band or whatever. Rehearse. And then you'll, let's take a slightly bigger scale thing than maybe like a school show, right? Like, let's go something like West End or Cirque du Soleil or something. That you'll go from rehearsals, then you'll rehearse on stage in the environment that you'll be in. Then you'll do a technical rehearsal. So with lights and the sound as the sound will be.
Yeah.
Then you might do a dress rehearsal. So you're then, on stage with the lights, with the sound, with the costume.
Yeah.
Then you might do an open dress rehearsal where you also have an audience. It's still a rehearsal, but it's to a live audience. And then you'll have the actual opening night of the show or the performance. Right? And at each stage, and this is something I only kind of...
We've talked about this. This is good. I like it.
Have we? It's something I only realized a few years ago. And it's really obvious that that's like the progression that you do. And
Yeah.
you know, if you're in any of that as an industry or as a hobby or whatever in any way, like it's really kind of obvious that that's what you do. Like you go,
Yeah.
and then you set up your amp and your blah 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 and whatever, and you know, you progress through that. But what you're doing at each stage is you're getting yourself used to an additional level of threat.
Yeah. Yeah. We talked about this with 30 Days of Confidence.
Right. Yeah, of course. So it normalizes and lets your brain adapt to a new environment. So like, oh, okay, nothing to be scared of. I'm familiar with this. It's not unpredictable. You know, if you went from like learning your chords to being in front of 10,000 people in Wembley Stadium, like, oh my God, you would brick yourself.
Yeah.
You know, like you would absolutely fill your pants. You know, it's a reduction in threat, and it allows you to predict what it's going to be like. It allows your brain is a prediction machine, right? Survival via prediction. That's the brain's job. Number one, brain's job, survival via prediction.
We've talked a bit about this as teachers or maybe this year or last year. You have your comfort zone, the panic zone, and then in between the bit where you learn and you get stretched. So if it's too easy, it's boring. If it's too hard, it's also boring and frustrating. But if it's a little bit difficult or difficult enough, then that's when learning happens. And I've been saying
it's still threat. It's still a bit of threat.
Yeah,
it's just not incapacitating.
Yeah, you're not completely frozen.
It's engaging because it switches your brain on. Like, oh, okay, I'm ready. I don't know what the hell's going on here, but I'm ready.
Yeah,
like that's what your brain does.
Yeah. And sometimes some of the pupils I teach, or even I can see it in myself. If I don't have to grapple with something, then I will get bored. Or enjoying, even when I'm trying to write something and grappling with it, and then feeling like I don't get anywhere, going away and then coming back, and suddenly it all comes together. That happens a lot with guitar, a lot. So I'll grapple and I'll be like, I can't do this, can't do this. Go away, play it a couple of days later or a day later, suddenly it's all flowing. But too often, I think that people I know, some occasionally pupils, they want it now. They want to be good at it now. And being willing to go through being terrible at something is part of the learning process. And again, I experienced that partly with guitar, but I really experienced it with martial arts. Being willing to be open to looking like a complete idiot as part of a learning process.
Yeah.
And training myself to be okay with looking like a complete idiot is okay. But that allowed me to progress. And again, my martial arts instructor, was very much like, when I'm not there in the class, he noticed. He was so used to me being there as a student. He was like, okay, like you were going, I'm ready. I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm ready. That kind of readiness to learn is...
It reminds me a bit of one of the things that I used to tell my students when I would teach them. And I think maybe we've talked about this before, I'm not sure. One of the assignments that I give them when I was telling my students to create a new piece was to make something bad, like monumentally awful.
Okay.
Right? I was like, I don't care what you make right now, create a 1-minute piece of trash. Because it does the same thing. Like, it allows them to go, okay, this is going to be bad. I know it's going to be bad. In fact, my job is to have it be bad. It takes the threat away.
And I think the threat might be the threat of creating something, wanting to, is this right?
I don't know.
You don't really?
I'm not sure.
Because creating something can be really challenging.
It can be, but I don't think it's the creating that's really challenging. I think that, at least in looking at my students, and I've taught many students, it's not, they don't get stopped or inhibited by creating. They get stopped or inhibited by thinking they should meet a certain standard and they're not going to.
Right, not trying to like getting it wrong.
Yeah, getting it wrong.
Yeah,
absolutely.
The standard is here.
The getting it
if
wrong
I'm not there, I'm getting it wrong.
Yeah, there's an expectation either that's actually been set or that they've got for themselves in their head of like, oh, this is what's expected, or I've got to do it this well, or it's got to look good. I've got to look good, and I'm not going to. Then your survival is threatened. For your brain, your survival is threatened. And in terms of being a performer, it's like it's looking good in front of other people or looking good in their eyes. It's like a social survival. If they don't like what I do, I could be kicked out of this tribe. It's social survival. So when I'd give them that assignment of make something bad, they didn't have to worry about or be concerned about whether it was going to be good enough, because the bar was so low that they could do it. And every single time, like literally every single time, without fail, they would clear that bar by miles. They would always create something that was far better, not necessarily good, but far better than absolute trash. And again, every single time it gave them something that they could start to work on and develop.
Yep.
So it didn't matter that it wasn't good. It was the start of something. It was, how do I say it? It's like, when you dig silver out of the ground, right? It doesn't look like silver.
It
looks like a piece of rock, and then and then it's got to be refined. It goes to the refinery, and like all of the bits of rock get taken out, and the metal itself that's really like dispersed amongst the rock gets extracted. And that's what we do. We'd like take this really rough, ugly piece of material and we'd refine it because it had the essence of something that was going to be really, really great. And even if it was only like a 1 minute thing that they did, like, okay, well, there's your opening phrase. There's the opening phrase of your performance. Brilliant. Or the middle phrase, or like whatever it ended up being, it didn't really matter. But like they'd have something that we could build on and refine and develop.
And I think that relates to that's why I said the thing about the process of creating. That's coming up with something, whatever it is, just come up with something that will then evolve to become something really cool.
Yeah,
or could evolve.
Except because I've tried giving that assignment in the past of like just create something.
Okay.
Right? Just come up with 1 minute of something. They still have that. They still have an expectation of what it is that they should be.
Interesting.
As opposed to setting the expectation of make
monumentally
it bad. Make it monumentally tacky, monumentally like unwatchable. Right?
Maybe I'll try that.
The lower that you can set
write
the bar,
a bad essay.
Yeah, write an awful, awful essay. Make it so bad. Write it as if you're a 7-year-old or a 4-year-old. Like, write it bad.
Yeah.
And then we're going to pull it apart and we're going to reconstitute it, and we're going to like pull out the words and the phrases that actually have that say something, and then we can develop that. Because when you go like, oh, just take 5 minutes and write something, or take 5 minutes and make a 1 minute routine. Doesn't matter what you do, just make a minute routine. The bar is still set. It may not be set by you or me, but it's set by themselves.
Yeah. And
it stops them. It paralyzes them because there's a risk. There's a social risk.
Yeah, that's good. What you're saying about the silver thing, it does remind me of something one of my colleagues says. With enough pressure, you can make a diamond. And he uses it to refer to jokingly about coursework and about coursework not getting done and about coursework needing to get done. And sometimes some pupils will only do it when they feel the pressure of an actual exam or an actual like submission or whatever it is. Yeah. Never mind all the stress that goes with that can make it mean that people aren't performing at their best. But
yeah, and there is one, like if we're going to extend that analogy, there is one problem with that, which is that it only works with a certain element. When you're putting pressure on the right thing, then it works.
Yeah.
If you're putting pressure on the wrong thing, you're not going to end up with a diamond.
It just breaks.
Right? So like you got to know your student as well. Like if we're talking about students, you got to know your student, because if it's the wrong student and all you do is exert pressure, you know, or if they exert it for themselves, or if they experience it by, you know, the imminent exam or whatever it is.
Yeah.
You know, if it's too much pressure on the wrong body, not physical body, but on the wrong element, it's you know, what you're engaging is fight or flight. You know, and some will fight, and that's like, that may be the diamond. You know, and some may flight, and that's more likely to be like, I'm out of here.
Yeah. I was watching a great video.
And that's not necessarily physically, like, okay, I'm actually leaving, or I'm dropping out of the course, or
they've gone.
You know, they've gone, like
they're
mentally,
absent.
Emotionally, and that can look like, well, I don't care about the result.
Yeah.
I'm not going to pass. It's not worth me trying. I'm done.
Yeah. And I talked about that, feeling safe and being safe in my classrooms before, and it's one of the things I came up with 3 things that I expect in my classroom. One of them is like being safe, and but what you're saying about applying the right pressure reminds me of a video I saw when Metallica were recording their biggest selling album ever, the Black Album, one of the best selling albums ever, the one with Enter Sandman on it and a lot of their big songs. And there's a clip of the producer, Bob Rock, working with the lead guitarist, Kirk Hammett. And he's really pushing him. He's really saying, look, you haven't done your homework. You've turned up and you're not prepared. What are you doing? How are we going to, you can do better than that. And you see this like clip of them recording it. He's like, no, that's terrible. Do it again. And he's really pushing him. And it's the solo for The Unforgiven. And I think it was voted at the time like best guitar solo,
right?
And he'd won an award for like best guitar solo, and he was saying to him, "That's not this year's best guitar solo. Do it again." And he's really
what's the name of that? What's the name of that drumming movie with J.K. Simmons?
Whiplash.
It reminds me of
Whiplash. Also a Metallica song, but yes, he's that. I love that film.
It's an amazing film.
It's a really intense watch. Did he get an Oscar?
Can't remember.
J.K. Simmons? I think he might have.
Have to ask Graham.
Yes, Graham, the encyclopedia of Oscar winners. That conversation was so stupid.
No, but like that's an interesting example of pressure, right? Like that movie is all about exerting pressure, and there's a point where it's useful. It drives him, and then it drives him away. Yeah.
There is a point. Finding that point. But I agree with what you're saying. I think it comes from knowing the people you're working with or whatever. But I also think that the ability to get to know someone and understand them and teach them or support them or whatever depends on emotional awareness and depends on being aware of someone else's emotions. I think if you want to get the best from someone and working with someone, knowing what their strengths are, knowing what they're great at, knowing what they're terrible at, knowing what they like, knowing how they are, I think that's what allows a team to work really well together, or 2 people to work really well together. I'm beginning to see that with 2 of my colleagues in the business department. We're developing a really close working relationship where we know what we're good at and how we work, and we bounce ideas off each other. And funnily enough, it's happened because we're in close proximity with each other. We share an office now. That proximity has allowed us to develop our emotional understanding of each other, so it can form a team, so it can grow. If we weren't in the office together, it wouldn't have happened. It would be this whenever we'd have a meeting, which just isn't the same. But that process of getting to know someone, I think, is really important for growth, development, creativity, all of those cool teamwork, all that cool stuff.
Well, maybe it all comes from survival. Maybe
yes.
Maybe
maybe that's what emotions are.
Well,
it's a tool for survival.
They're definitely, they're definitely a tool for survival. I don't know if that would define them, because there are probably many tools for survival. But when someone is familiar to you, they are less of a threat. When you know how to navigate around, not around them, like avoid them, but like when you know how to navigate with them, like what their strengths are and what their weaknesses are, and what their buttons are, and if you know what's going to happen if you press their buttons, and how far you can push a joke, or like all of that. Like when you know that stuff, you can predict their response and
kind of relax. You feel safe.
And everyone can relax and feel safe, because again, the brain's job is survival via prediction. And if you can predict how they're going to be, and what they're going to do, and how they're going to act, and what they're going to say, and how they're going to respond, and how you're going to respond to them, because it's all familiar, less threat. Less threat, more prediction, survival. Ding. The brain survives, right? Go, oh, I know this. Less threat, no threat. I'm cool. Put yourself,
It was the way you did the ding. it really sounded like a electronic made ding. Because you're really getting into this whole thinking about things from a neurological perspective.
Yeah, I am. And you don't know this, but yesterday I registered to start training in being an actual practitioner, a neurocentric movement practitioner.
You're going to have to explain that, what a neurocentric movement practitioner is.
So it would be someone who practices movement, not just from a biomechanical perspective, like not like most physiotherapists.
But hang on, when you say biomechanical, you mean like how our bodies move?
How the bodies work, how the bodies move, right? Okay. This muscle attaches here, this muscle attaches here, this joint looks like this. If this muscle contracts, this joint flexes, etc., right? If your bicep contracts, your elbow flexes, and and if you've got a pain here, then and you can work it out on a mechanical perspective. Same for being a acrobatics teacher. Like 90% of what I did was mechanical. Throw like this, catch like this, jump like this, land like this, run like this. Don't go like this with your arms as you run. Go like this with your arms as you run. Or bring them like to the midline. To your body's midline. Don't cross the midline. Like whatever it is, right? Jump at this angle. Body tension, like all of that stuff, right? And then there was like 10% that was maybe psychological, right? And I'd say I was probably more psychological and even ontological with my students than most, right? So maybe even 15% of what I did, maybe.
Ontology, by the way, is the study of being.
Yeah.
So that's not a word that a lot of people have heard. Psychological, yes. Biomechanical, yes. Biology, yes. Ontological, not very often.
Yeah, ontology, the study of being. So who am I being?
Yeah.
And there are lots of ways that we can be. Possibly an infinite number of ways that we can be. Happy, sad, angry, distinct from feeling. You can feel scared and be courageous. You can be confident. You could be confident. You could be outspoken. You could be whatever. You could also just be bullish and abrupt and nasty, or whatever. Like there are lots of ways of being, but ontology be the study of being. So anyway, I like coach from that perspective, like some psychological, ontological, but 10-15%, and the majority of it would be physical, biomechanical. And taking a neurocentric approach would be starting with, well, what governs the body's movement is the brain. That's where movement starts in the brain. So if actually what you want is good movement, start with the brain. Doesn't mean that there's no value in the mechanics. The people who do it will often say that they're a neurobiomechanical practitioner rather than just a biomechanical practitioner.
Okay.
Now, interestingly, the guy that created this methodology, he originally trained as a chiropractor, as I understand it, and I'm not massively familiar with his background. So,
what's his name?
Dr. Eric Cobb.
Okay.
The company's called Z Health. He said that when he was training as a chiropractor, he was told that they were going to be training him in a neurobiomechanical way. Like he was going to be training in that. And actually he got to the end of it. And then when he finished that, he then started studying neurology. And what he discovered was his training hadn't been neurological in any way, shape or form. Like, not really. Like, he might have learned the anatomy of the nerves and which nerves control which muscles, but probably not how the visual system or the vestibular system get integrated and interpreted by the brain to output movement. So the brain receives inputs. I'm going to pause and ask another question. Yeah, go for it.
You've talked about the vestibular system a lot before in our conversations. I'm not totally sure what that is.
The vestibular system is your balance system.
Okay, so I thought it was your sense of your body. Okay, all right.
The balance system in your inner ear. So your inner ear has like 3 canals, basically. Mm-hmm. You know how like your phone has an accelerometer?
Yeah.
Right. That tells your camera, am I this way up or am I this way up?
Yeah.
Right. And your compass, like which way am I pointing? Do you know how they work, by the way?
What, in the phone or in the ear?
In the phone.
No, I don't know how they work in the phone.
It's different to how it happens in your inner ear.
Yeah, I know in the ear is like liquid and that the nerves sense orientate you.
In your phone, what you've got is 2 diagonal tubes. This is a simplified version, right? But you can imagine this, right? Imagine 2 diagonal tubes with a tiny ball bearing in them. So when your phone is this way up, both ball bearings are at the bottom.
Yeah, okay, you have to.
When you go
we have talked about this.
Let me switch this hand round.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. You've got a ball bearing in the bottom here and a ball bearing at the other end here.
Yeah.
And when you go the other way, it's the opposite. And when you go upside down, you end up with the ball bearings at the other end, the wide end, as opposed to the narrow end. So it can interpret which orientation is the phone
based on the position
of the ball bearing within the tube. Right, that's a very simplified version of, and maybe that's not the case in like ultra modern phones, but certainly that was the basic premise, and I imagine it hasn't changed. Like, it works.
And how did you know that?
I don't know. Learn.
You just learn.
I bump into these things.
Oh my god.
In the inner ear, it's a bit different. You do still have these 3 canals in each ear.
For each dimension?
Yeah, pretty much. You've got one that deals with horizontal movement, one that deals with vertical movement, and one that deals with rotation.
Oh, okay.
Basically, and their job is to recognize and determine your orientation in space.
Mm-hmm.
Is my head this way up or this way up?
Mm-hmm.
And movement. Am I traveling forwards or backwards? Interesting sidebar. Motion sickness is caused by a discrepancy between what your vestibular system is telling your brain and what your visual
okay.
So if you're sitting in a car and your eyes are telling you, I'm moving really, really, really fast because the world is going by really, really, really quickly, but your inner ear is telling your brain, I'm sitting still, then you get, like, your brain doesn't know how to interpret that information. It goes, oh, what the hell's going on? I don't know. And you either get nausea or dizziness or that's an output of the brain.
The nausea is an
The
output.
nausea, the nausea.
Yeah.
Like, get me out of here.
Yep.
If you don't get me out of here, I'm going to be sick.
Yeah.
Get me out of here. It's a survival mechanism. There's something wrong here.
Yep.
Get out of this situation.
Yeah.
And my students used to have it, often doing forward rolls. They get this, their brain would get confused, and they might, I don't know exactly what they do with their eyes. They probably, like, some of them kept them open, some of them kept them closed, but like I don't know what's going on here. I feel sick. Get me out of here. Stop this. And it would almost always, there were some extreme cases, but it would almost always reduce if they just did a little bit over time. Like, okay, just do 2 or 3 forward rolls this week. Don't do any more. Don't do them fast. Take a break in between each one. And then slowly, the brain goes, oh, okay, this is familiar. I recognize this. Pattern recognition. I've done this before. I didn't die.
Yeah.
Everything worked out. Class was quite fun. I can handle this. And it would diminish over time. They might still get a bit dizzy and nauseous and whatever if they did like 12 in a row really, really fast. Right? But that's like pushing their brain into, like, you talked about that comfort zone, whatever that middle one was, and then
the learning, the stretch, and then the
stretch,
panic,
and then the danger zone. So like it would be extending that. Anyway.
Have you lost the thread, or do you want me to tell you what it was?
Tell me what the thread was. I think I got it. Tell me what it was.
So the thread was, you were distinguishing and explaining what neurobiomechanical, what the whole world of neuro training was, and you were explaining about the visual system and the vestibular system and how they interact. And then I asked you what the vestibular system was.
Okay, so that's the vestibular system, right? 3 canals in your head that tell your brain, am I moving? Which way am I moving? Whatever, right? You could, a neurobiomechanical approach would be brain first, neurocentric, brain first. Start there, because what you're, as well as survival, your brain's other job is movement. They're the two jobs of the brain. No movement, no brain. There are animals like
wait a minute. No movement, no brain.
Yeah. No brain, no movement, no brain. Yeah.
So if something doesn't move, it doesn't have a brain.
There are urchins, anemones, like, I don't know what they are exactly, that have a brain, like a very basic central nervous system. They float around in the water, and then they latch on to, I don't know, a rock or something, and that's it. That's their life. They're going to sit there and they're going to feed, but they no longer need to move, and they consume their brain.
Oh wow!
They no longer have a need to move.
To have the brain, so they eat the brain. Okay.
Don't need to move. Don't need the brain.
Zombies.
Done. Yeah. I'll find out what they are. I can't remember. I'll come back to you on that at some point. But yeah, they're the brain's 2 jobs: survival and movement. So if you want to, so the brain's job is to take sensory input. Vestibular, like balance, visual, sound, taste, proprioception, your sense of touch and
pressure.
Proprioception is your body's like internal map of where you are in space. Like, it's the reason that you can touch your nose with your eyes closed, is because even when you can't see it, your brain has a picture of where your hand is and where your nose is, and can put the 2 together.
Yeah, martial arts and dancing are great for developing that. Dancing tango and doing martial arts is the amount of times where I'd be on the floor grappling, and I'm like, but someone would say, right, just move your left arm, and I'm like, I have to think, where is my left arm right now, or what's happening? I can't tell where I am, but I couldn't believe how how much difference that made to my experience of being in my body. And there probably was some neurological effects it was having, but the idea
it has to. There's no way that it can't, because your brain is always receiving signals and then it's got to interpret them.
But the idea of flipping it and starting with the brain, I think that's really interesting.
Yeah. So
really interesting.
So what you could say is, if either the sensory input is bad,
yep,
or the interpretation of that input is bad,
yep,
then you're going to have a reduced output in movement.
Okay.
Now, that might be nausea. Like I'm sitting in a car and feeling sick because the brain can't reconcile these two things. Visual input and vestibular input can't reconcile that. It's not that either one is wrong. They're both right. Yeah, I'm traveling. My eyes are telling me I'm traveling really fast, and I am. And my inner ear is telling me I'm sitting still, and I am.
Could sleep be another output?
Sleep
instead of nausea.
Sleep could be an output. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's what happens to people like in the trenches. You know what happens to people in the army who are like literally in the trenches with bombs dropping around them?
Mm-hmm.
You know what they do?
Sleep. Switch off.
No, they sleep. They fall asleep. They get exhausted. It's so threatening. It's so threatening. It's not just fight or flight. You know what the third one is?
Freeze.
Fight, flight, or freeze. Okay, survival's at stake here. Like, I gotta, I can't fight. I can't flee. Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm going to sleep. Yeah, it's totally an output.
Because I was thinking about being in the car and just falling asleep. Because
do you get motion sickness?
Not really. I don't always fall asleep in the car. Sometimes I go to sleep.
It also might just be pattern recognition.
Yeah. I'm associating it. Sit in the back of the car. I'm just going to go to sleep.
It's a very sort of fetal experience.
Yeah. Like going to the cinema.
Yeah. It's dark, it's enclosed, there's a bit of vibration, there's a bit of white noise.
That's why Davina falls asleep in films.
Yeah.
She falls asleep. I don't know how anyone can fall asleep in cinema, but
Yeah.
It's quite, I like the way you said that. It's quite a fetal experience. Yeah.
Yeah.
But all of that, everything you're saying is, I think, all that, it really is tying together emotions, emotional responses, how our brain is, survival, how much of our whole life is about surviving. Every moment is something to do with survival. Our brain is interpreting all this stuff. It's about survival. And it's really making me think about the times where I've felt threatened. There's no actual threat sometimes, but I feel threatened. I come home from work and I'm knackered, and my wife says something to me. Suddenly I'm angry, like I'm ready to, that my whole being is just like can't handle whatever it was for whatever reason. Yeah. Or then you have to wonder, like in a classroom, we were talking in episode 3 about learning, the school environment. What's that like for someone who's overwhelmed by like noise? What's that like for someone who's got, I don't know, who feels scared when a teacher shouts? What's that like? Like that's how can you learn when you're scared? That ain't happening. The brain, that it'd be really interesting to do an experiment to see like what going on in people's brains when they're in the classroom, like the entire class.
That hasn't already been done.
Like, it would be so interesting because there'd be all sorts of like madness.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know about madness, but like
there are plenty of studies done on the brain when people are learning stuff. I was reading about one today. I was reading about people learning Braille, learning to read Braille with their finger.
Mm-hmm.
That was interesting. They were given brain scans. So I can't remember the exact amount, but they had something like 2 hours of Braille training a day and then 1 hour of homework 5 days a week, Monday to Friday. Mm-hmm. And then they were given a brain scan. I forget exactly what scan, probably couldn't have been an MRI. can't imagine they did a ton of MRIs every Friday. And then whatever it was, they had some kind of brain scan on a Friday and then some kind of scan on a Monday as well after the weekend. And they different basically what was active on a Friday was totally gone by Monday.
Wow.
Totally gone. Over the course of, I forget exactly, about 9 months or something. But what was happening at the same time, and in sort of in an inverse way, was that the part of the brain that lit up for sensory input from the finger was growing very, very slowly at first, and then picked up at the end. And then when they were tested like a long time later, that sensory input was still there, like the part of the brain that had developed very slowly, which is like your long-term muscle memory almost.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's no such thing as muscle memory. It's still neurological, right? It's a neural pathway that's ingrained, but you know, it's like why cramming for a test works short term, but then don't remember anything, you know, a week later.
Yeah.
You know? But if you immerse yourself in something over a long period, you never forget it.
Yeah.
Like I'm never not going to be able to juggle, you know, bar, I don't know, having a stroke or something like that. Like I will always be able to pick up 3 balls and juggle.
Will I still be able to juggle? Probably.
But it wouldn't be as ingrained as me, right? Like
absolutely not.
So
because
many times for so many years. Right?
Yes.
And it was difficult at first.
Yeah.
And if I crammed it, you know, like I've taught people to juggle in 35 minutes, 30 minutes, 20 minutes, 15 minutes even. Right? I've taught people to juggle really, really rapidly. And they could do it. Now, if they didn't do it for a month or 6 months or a year, would they still be able to do it? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe not. But could they relearn it? Sure. If they learnt it once, they could totally learn it again. But it wouldn't be ingrained in the way that it's ingrained for me. It's like it's. And
when you say ingrained, you mean those neural pathways have been so well trodden that the
movement pattern fires.
The whole thing. Yeah. Okay. No. Yeah. Well, we might have found our next theme. Maybe we should, after emotions, we should talk about the brain.
I don't know that I'm actually knowledgeable enough to talk about the brain for an hour, but we can give it a go. I mean,
well, like you said last week,
and see where it goes.
That's exactly what you said before. Last week, it's a starting point.
At some point, I'll remember that that's what we're doing.
We haven't had a load of pupils messaging during a live stream this week.
Hang on a moment. My cats are starting to go nuts, and I think they might have to go to the litter tray. I need to open the door for them.
I didn't even know they were in there.
They've been sleeping. They've been sleeping, but they just woke up a couple of minutes ago.
So I think we should pick a theme for next week. Emotion.
We can pick a theme, but we don't have to necessarily announce it live.
No.
Do we have anyone with us this week?
Jack posted something, but I do want to have this. Just remind everybody why we're here. We've been joining the dots forward. We had one message from Jack saying Mobamba. Don't know what that means.
November?
It could be. But I will be putting in the links to sponsor our moustaches. Mine's kind of blending.
Yeah, you need to shave.
What do you mean I need to shave? It's just the quality of my camera.
You need to shave your camera then.
Yeah, okay. And you need to get rid of that spider on your camera. I don't know what that was. I'll put the links to sponsor us. I put them on the previous videos, and we'll pick a theme. There might be something that comes up between now and next week, but it's been really, really interesting listening to you really create that connection between emotion, the brain, neurology, movement. Like no brain, no movement. Like wow. And also to know how much my experience of my body has been informed by.
It's the other way around though, James. It's not no brain, no movement. It's no movement,
right, no movement, no brain. Sorry.
Yeah. No movement required, no brain required.
Wow. Okay. No movement, no brain.
I mean, it also is the case, like no brain, no movement, you know.
But no movement, no brain
Yeah.
required. That's mad. I think that's, for me, that's really interesting, really
Yeah, yeah.
mad thing. And it's also made me think about the difference that martial arts has made for me, my experience of my body. Because when I was younger, it was always, I was terrible at sport. And I just didn't try. It's like, I'm terrible, can't be bothered, not going to try, forget it.
Mm.
Can't move, it's just rubbish. And I think being a guy who's not that tall, it's always been a thing for me. So it's really changed my experience and my experience of my body. But now I'm thinking about things in terms of the brain. I'm doing the tap tap drill, which Davina's getting into as well. So but actually something I just remembered, it would be really interesting if, I don't know if it'll ever happen or we could do it, to do brain scans of an entire classroom when they're in school, just to see the range of nonsense that's happening and how, dare I say it, how little learning is actually going on.
I don't know. There's masses of learning going on.
Well, sorry,
just not necessarily the class subject.
That's what I was about to say. How little learning of the actual topic that the teacher is talking about and is explaining, actually teaching, is happening.
Yeah.
But I'm really glad you pointed that out, because it's easy to think that learning is sitting there being able to absorb and regurgitate what the teacher's saying, when that is absolutely not what learning is. But you should go and watch episode 3 for more about learning.
Was that episode 3?
Yeah, it was.
All right.
We're coming to the end of episode 6. Do you have any final wise words, apart from sponsor us for November so we can get loads of money and stop men dying so young?
Yeah, so one of the things that I found out this week was from Movember, 3 out of 4 suicides are men.
Yep.
That's a pretty big deal.
Yep. It is a big deal.
And the precursor to that is mental health.
Yep.
That if people are suicidal, that's a mental health issue. And if men don't have a way of expressing that and a forum for expressing that, which they don't, because it's not talked about in our culture particularly, like you're one of the very few people who have talked about it publicly on the news, like on the television, on the radio, in the newspapers, on blogs. Like you've been very vocal about not necessarily specifically men's mental health, but some of the things that men feel they can't talk about.
That's true. I have actually thinking about it.
And some of the things that men don't talk about.
Yes, I have. And I have noticed that connecting masculinity with men's fertility, which is one of the things that men don't talk about and people don't talk about, with mental health, isn't done very often. There's a growing body of stuff talking about masculinity and mental health, but not much. And
I'll give you something else that's not talked about much around with men.
Yeah.
Emotions.
That's what I was about to say. You did it for me. You did it for me. Men's health, men's mental health, emotional. And I think what would allow for men to develop their mental health is understanding their own and being able to articulate their own emotions. Maybe we'll talk about this next week.
And then just to tie that all together with a nice big bow.
Yes.
The experience of not being able to talk about their emotions is threatening. It's a neurological survival mechanism.
But hang on. The experience of not being able to talk about their emotions.
Yeah. I can't talk about my emotions. That I can experience, I can't talk about my emotions.
Okay.
If I talk about my emotions, that would be threatening.
Yes. Okay. I think it's a better way of saying it. If I talk about my emotions, that would be threatening. So I'm not going to. So I don't. So I won't. So I'll just.
And then you get 3 out of 4 suicides being men.
Yep. So sponsor us to help men stop dying so young. Great. You're getting quite. Maybe I'll let you tie it all together next week with a nice bow.
I'll do it when it's there for me to say. When I've got something useful to say.
You mean you can't do it on purpose?
I probably could do it on purpose. I mean, you know, you do it in the classroom, right?
Maybe it doesn't come as naturally to you as it does to me. I don't know.
You got connectedness in your top five. You're good at putting a bow around everything and bringing it all together.
Yeah, that's true. So, and with that, thank you very much for watching.
See you next Tuesday.